All right. Welcome back to another episode of the ERG Movement Podcast. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Michele, and I go by the ERG Homegirl, truly all things ERGs, but today is not about me. On the ERG Movement Podcast, every now and then we have some dope people from all around the ERG space, and today is no different. MJ, give us an intro. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
First of all, Maceo, thank you so much for having me. I've been a fan of your work for quite a while. A little bit about me. I go by MJ, Michelle Jordan. I use she, her pronouns. I am someone that is always looking to advocate for culture, advocate for us in this workplace. I'm coming off 10 years at Nike, 20 plus years simply in corporate America in HR with a sharp focus now driving culture for corporations. I'm super excited to be here.
Definitely
Okay.
excited to have you. I already know some things that you've helped to bring to life and to happen, so I'm really excited to dive into them. Before we do though, one thing I always love to learn is just your journey and what led you to ERGs and what first got you involved in ERGs.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I go back probably a few companies ago where I have a tech background. So I was with a company many years ago. And this was the season of being colorblind. I don't know if y'all remember it, but it was like leaders would just say, I don't see you as being black. I don't see you as being a woman. I'm colorblind, right? And so at this particular organization, I was the most senior person of color, the most senior woman, and found myself struggling in the space of who do I go to? How do I share more about what my lived experience is within this organization? And so I feel like through sheer self preservation, I found my way into the ERG space. So I would go on to found the ERG space for that organization, help really drive their first kind of ERG strategy and policies, and really tried to help them navigate culture. And I got to the point where it was just time to go. We know what it's like when we're in these spaces and it's just harmful. And so after, gosh, 11, 12 years at that organization, I left for a contractor position at Nike. Hear me in this. I had great benefits. I had all the things, a pension plan, all of it, turned it all away just for a hourly, maybe get my foot in the door at Nike. And that turned into a 10-year career where my legacy, I'm so proud of it, of the work that has been done. And then through even at Nike, though, there's this kind of concept that we're based in Beaverton, Oregon, right? So not the most diverse, not the most inclusive place. And so you have this iconic brand that attracts all kinds of incredible talent. Once you get to Beaverton, though, it may be a different lived experience, and that was the case for me and some others within, certain underrepresented groups. And so I found myself even at Nike, doing great work. It's amazing. It's Nike. It's all the things. And there was those times where, ooh, you start to feel those microaggressions. Ooh, you just felt like, why isn't that I don't see more representation at these more senior leadership levels? And so I found the ERGs there at Nike, and I realized how it actually happened was I found a senior leader, a Black woman. I didn't even know that we had those. This was some years ago at Nike. So when I found her, I was like, "Ugh, how amazing would it be for us to have a mentoring or have a partnership?" And she was like, that's cute and all, but what I would prefer to do is if you can gather some like minded women, I'll rock with you. We can create a circle. So I took that idea to our Black Employee Network ERG, and that circle now is going 2, 3 years strong, right? So helped to found that, and that kind of got me in the door with Nike's ERGs there. From there, I really just took the bull by the horns and got into some greater leadership. And what at the time that I left Nike, I was one of their co-chairs. And to know what that is at that type of level, my community, or excuse me, my committee was about 26 members strong globally, right? So very built out, very involved. And Nike's Black Employee Network in particular was really one of the networks that really was blazing some incredible work around inclusion that I'm so incredibly proud of that team and what we were able to do in those spaces. And long story short, those experiences working both on a DEI side as well as my ERG side set me up great for my current role where I actually oversee our ERG strategy at my company today. So long answer, but hopefully we got there.
No, I love that, and it actually is a pretty good segue. Now, actually, before I ask this question, for context, when you first founded that first ERG, if you had to guesstimate the year that was, what would you say?
Oh, I don't have to guess. That would have been 2001. Like it's been a minute ago. I've been in the game for a minute. Yeah. It was about 20 years ago.
Okay, so I'm
Yeah.
doing like a running, I'm not gonna call it a competition, but like a competition of the earliest ERG founder participant. So far, you take the cake with 2001. So that being said, I would imagine that things have changed over the years. I'm curious how you would describe the corporate space. And I know you were mentioning, you alluded to it a little bit with saying people were a little bit more colorblind and using that type of language, but what were some other things that were happening then that are, let's say, one thing that's the same and one thing that's drastically different now versus then?
Yeah, I think a couple things have changed. Back then, it was really around affinity, right? It was really around community. It was really around, can we celebrate difference and do that with the company as a backdrop? So we did things like having cultural fairs and conversations across cultural partnerships and celebrating culture. So that was really a big thing. I think that's still important today, but where I think we are today, it's also as a result of where the company consciousness has evolved, right? We now know that colorblind is not really where it's at. It's really about being color brave. No, MJ, I see that you are a woman. I see that you're black. And I see that you're this dope leader in our organization. So it's really shifting to where we are able to, in corporate America, in these corporate spaces, acknowledge our differences. And that is very new, I would say. I think the other piece that's really different is the strategic impact, right? We know today that when a company recognizes DEI, when they celebrate difference in culture, when they promote it, they're going to attract the best of the best. They're going to attract the best minds, the innovations, those types of things are going to happen. And oh, by the way, your talent pool, they're going to be more engaged. So you're going to see higher tenure, you're going to see higher engagement and satisfaction scores, which means people are going to stay with that organization a little bit longer. And so there we know that there's a whole financial metric ROI there as well. So many, I think, differences and similarities into how the spaces were 20 plus years ago to how they are today.
Now, another piece and another angle I'm curious about it is when it comes to ERGs, what type of programming were you all really centering on then? In addition to cultural fairs, was there something that you all were leaning towards, or even was events like a bigger thing back then than it is now? Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, I think it was really centering different cultures and communities. I mentioned things like around food and celebration, I'd say what we know to be true today around like heritage moments, things like that, and community, and just finding each other and saying we're in this thing together and that affinity and building that network. Those were some of kind of like the things there. The other thing though in the space also had to do with some policy, and that was really around understanding, like, even for women. So back then, for this particular organization, I can recall where, as a new mom, myself and others were directed to our sick rooms to nurse and to pump. Who's really doing that? Like, really, it's not sterile. The hygiene, like, this is really the place for me. So even through those kinds of things, where we were able to bump up against and make some policy changes, even way back then, that you would think are foundational, but really weren't foundational back then. I'm so really proud of that work. And I think even today, the policy changes, if it's not written, it's not real. Like some of those things are really critical to have happen today as well.
Very interesting. And I can see how back then, even just thinking about a time before Slack and Teams was a thing, and even like disseminating messages to your members, it must have been different where I guess it would have to be rooted heavily on events for that connection piece, whereas now we could just do it in a channel or something like that.
Yeah, completely, absolutely. Definitely. Yeah.
Interesting.
Lot more in
Interesting.
person. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I another thing that I want to get into is you mentioned that you led this ERG team of 26. That's a huge committee, more than some companies have for their entire ERG leadership team across all their ERGs. One, just want to get into what were some best practices that you have in terms of running this larger team, holding people accountable, and making sure that things get done, really.
That's really the name of the game. One, I should say I was a co-chair, one of 3, right? So we each had, different subcommittees that we were leading in a little bit more than others. So there was that, like, a little bit of divide and conquer. And so with that model, you had trust, right? So it wasn't like every co-chair, every lead had to be at every single meetings, right? You started to go from a man to a zone offense. So that was really important. I think we thought of it, these are just foundational things, but almost like running it like a business. So we would have offsites, right? Where we talked about what's really our strategic goals for the year. We partnered really closely with DEIB to understand the data and insights. And one kind of quick story there was we learned that from a numbers perspective, we were hiring I would say significant amounts of Black folks. I'm speaking specifically for our Black Employee Network, ERG. So great. We're hiring folks, we're getting them in the berm. That's amazing. But when we looked at tenure and attrition, we saw that they were leaving at a higher rate than over the overall company. So that was a signal to us that, ooh, something is happening in that 1 to 2 year mark when you would have these Black new hires, African American new hires come to the swoosh. And so that spawned some different activations around a couple things. And just shout out to the overarching community for really the thoughts around how do we engage folks in that population. And so a couple things that we did was we created new hire moments where we would have a special event that's just to welcome them, usher them into the fold, if you will. Whereas if you just join a main bin event, you could have hundreds of folks on that call. And so it might feel a little bit more, I don't know, not really intimidating, but it's a different vibe than, hey, you all are the next cohort, you're new, we see you, we recognize you, and that kind of thing. And so that's one thing that I think we did. I think another thing that we did was create, to your point, both virtual and also in-person events. So we would have dinners. It would almost be almost like a lottery. Like you hop into this system to get the opportunity to have dinner with 10, 15 of your closest band friends that you don't know. And so then it's who's coming to dinner and you come and then you start to get to know each other from different parts of the organization and that kind of thing. And so that kind of builds community. And as a co-chair, I was able to attend some of those different dinners. And man, it was just so fascinating to really connect with the community and really hear firsthand what their lived experiences were and how important having these spaces of community were as well. I think I could really go on and on. Like we did just a number of different things. One other thing that we did that kind of flirted between my role in DEI at Nike and my role as a co-chair was we recognized, and I'm speaking now on the DEI side, we recognized that it was our co-chairs, our ERGs across the board that were most engaged. These were the ones that were passionate about culture, inclusion, but they may not have a deep background in intersectionality or of the language of DEI or the differences between equity and equality and some of those things. And so we invested in a 1 year program. We met monthly for 3 hours for an entire year through in partnership with the USC. And through that investment, we talked about all kinds of different facets of DEI, all different types of topics and all the things. And we certified not only our ERG leaders at that time, but we also invited in other folks from HR. And so it was definitely not just an ERG play, but the ERG leaders were a key piece of that. And even to this day, that impact that really empowered them to be able to have the language, to have the skills, to really adopt change back on the jobs. I can think of so many ERG leaders that were talking about MJ when it comes to product design. I was able to push back on our representation of gender and just different things. And so just seeing how when you go, I would say go slow a little bit to go fast, that impact and that momentum is really deep. And then the last thing that I'll say, I can really go off, but the one other piece is we were able to really meet the moment. We all know what happened May 25th, 2020, right? And especially for the Black employee, what we were able to do to meet that moment, to create a space virtually. We called it Wake Up with Ben. And kudos to the Ben members for the foresight and insight to just start the week, right? It was on Monday mornings, 8 o'clock. We would come together. We would have member that had access to a DJ set, so you could get those tunes coming in to set up the stage and just have some safe space to really talk about a number of topics. And so that particular program in particular was actually nominated for what Nike calls their it's like their Grammys, right? It was called the Maxim Awards. And they were nominated because of that impact. And you had all of the other ERGs marveling at the impact that particular program had and looking for ways to do things differently to help really bring their communities along as well. So, a lot of this, I'm sharing my firsthand experiences with Ben, but truly, all of the ERGs at the Swoosh really were doing just some incredible things to really drive impact and elevating community.
We're gonna dive into some of those too. I love hearing about the Wake Up with Ben initiative and so much of what you mentioned, but I really like that more recently I've been thinking about during the pandemic and especially with the Black Lives Matter movement. So doubling down on for Black ERGs. I think that in the ERG space, if you were a ERG leader at that time, it was already a lift, but especially as a Black ERG leader, what were some other things that you all did around that time? And really with the concept of some learnings that you would give to an ERG leader if their community is going through something, how they can best support their members. But would love to hear what are some other things that you all did around that time in general too.
I think having a strong partnership with your DEI team, because oftentimes it's messaging, right? When those worldly things happen, it's important to have a standardized approach on how to respond. We know that we can't send emails and acknowledgments for every single thing, but those important moments where saying nothing would be a detriment, right? So we have to get sharp and get clear around that. And also who has the D, right? Is that I don't know if it's necessarily ERGs or they're a strong partner with the organization's comms team, right? And that DEI leadership. So having that strong partnership, I think, is really important. I think some other things that we did, and I saw this with other ERGs where we had certain moments that really mattered across a number of different communities, is really centering the voice of that community and having allies in there that are there just to listen and just to learn, right? So creating that space virtually where people are crying, people are talking about their lived experiences and driving that safety, but also creating that space for allies to really understand. So if let's say you are a manager of someone, a part of a certain community, to not say something could be just as harmful, right? So how is it that we can give them that cup of courage to be able to really create that safe space for all different types of people on their teams and things like that. So those are a couple kind of key call outs that really come to mind.
Now, I was actually just going to ask if the ERG had if it was open to allies, so it sounds like it was. I'm curious, how do you advise, recommend people maintain psychological safety for their community when it is open to allies?
First of all, in the US, this is actually a legal issue. I've talked with a number of attorneys around this very point, right? So, from a legality perspective, we cannot exclude. So, there's that. My vantage point is I feel like two things can be true, right? One is it's important for us to be able to have community conversations. Like, I absolutely believe in that. And I also believe that it's also important to bring our allies along in this journey. And I think it's just being clear with how might we achieve both, right? Everything's open and we may be able to just say or figure out a way that we can still have that space for closed communities. I'm thinking about my LGBTQIA plus where maybe a person isn't out, right? And so they're looking for support and guidance. And so there's really a situation around harm and safety that needs to happen. Or our abilities folks where they're concerned that maybe their manager, they don't want to tell their manager if they have a disability or things like that. I can see how it's important for us to have that space and at the same time, it's a legal thing. We do not want these organizations to be sued. And so therefore it also also I do think a lot of us know these things, but it's those allies that we want really we need them to understand and learn these things as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely could not agree more. In addition to the fact that it's not like we have a choice, but even then, there can be some
Yeah.
perks into
Yeah.
having allies into the spaces as well.
Yeah.
And there's ways to do it where it doesn't necessarily sacrifice that safety piece too. Another pain point that comes up a lot within the ERG space is around global ERG. So you led this global ERG. Now, with that, what were some tips that you have in terms of, oh, one, was it that the ERG was united in any way on a global level, or did each region really take it and run with it? How did you all approach that?
Yeah, it's such a important point, and we were just really, I think, gaining traction when I left. But actually, as a part of our 3-year ERG strategy at my current company, global is one of my top priorities for the ERGs. And in fact, this week I'll be meeting with our API ERG leadership to talk about just this very thing because in our company, we're building out a really strong recruiting strategy with Mumbai, and so in India. And so it's really important to me that as the company expands, and so we have employees regionally, that we should figure out a way that we can tap them in and they can feel support as well. So, a couple things. I like the idea of what is it like? I don't know, 80/20 or something like that. Like you have a hub and spoke, right? So the hub can be your, I'm say your main ERG, but the spokes could be like a chapter. So we could have a chapter in India, we could have a chapter in EMEA or things like that. And so where I've seen this kind of work is that you have either a chapter liaison, and so they're a part of like ERG leadership team, where that works. And so there's that kind of bi-way or bi-directional communication that can happen between locals within that region and like the hub, that kind of thing. I'm a big fan that I don't like too much structure for structure's sake. So it also just really depends on can we achieve that spirit, but maybe one of your current ERG leads spends a lot of time or travels down there. So there could be ways to get after it, either structurally or just within the roles of your ERG leadership team. Mind you, this is all volunteer as well. So I'm also mindful of what that is. But I'm really excited about the global piece. I'm aware of our company. We had a couple folks from Dublin and also from London that recently joined. And so I'm speaking now more so from a Black demographic perspective. And it's so important that it's not necessarily about numbers, but we really want that infrastructure so that everyone can really feel that engagement. So whether that is adjusting the times of your meetings to consider different time zones, that could be a play. Like I said, the structure of outreach. I think another thing that I've seen done, and this is more in general, is we're starting to create 30 days after someone joins, sending out a message for me that amplifies the value of ERGs, gets them connected, an easy way to sign up. So we're catching everyone as they join the company as well, regardless of where they sit in region. But yeah, that this one I'm really excited to build us out a little bit more.
Huge fan of reaching out to new hires as they come in. And I love that you mentioned 30 days after they join. For a lot of companies, the only real onboarding approach is just at that initial onboarding meeting where it's like they're overwhelmed. So giving them time and then saying, hey, here's something to know. I've seen that be super successful. So I love to hear that you've also seen some success in that as well. With global in mind, and I guess here's what I'll do. We can play a game, if you will. It's not really a game, but we'll do a round of what I call best and worst. And
Okay.
worst is relative, but I'm going to list off a couple of different categories, and you can name the best thing in that category and the worst thing in that category. First one being qualities of an ERG leader.
Ooh, best, strategic, authentic, humble, collaborative, curious. What else? Bold. Yeah. Give it to me. Give it to me, ERG leaders. Worst, it's about me, right? Sometimes we have folks in these roles where it's really more about their shine than being a vehicle to shine the light on the community. That I'm not feeling it. I'm sorry. I'm not. So there's that. That being said, I recognize that it is a volunteer role and I absolutely want to amplify and pour into that community. But those that are really just in it for that, not having it. Yeah.
Fair enough. Are there events that you've seen? And I know not worst sounds harsh, but what are some things even that you've seen that hasn't worked? So favorites, and then this was a learning.
Yes. Favorites. So many favorites. I got to give it to Ben with our sneaker ball. So it was our signature moment at the end of February, Black History Month, where we would have the best party. You wear your best kicks, best Nikes, Jordans, and celebrate all things culture, all things Blackness. And it was done big. And that really seemed to set just such a beautiful tone around culture and community that I just have not seen replicated. Many have tried, but there's only the first and the finest. We'll just say that. On the opportunity side, I feel like truly in this space, if it doesn't hit, it's like we learn and we get better. That's the vibe. That's where kind of my mind goes. I'm trying to think of anything. I think I've seen it where there's this kind of constant opportunity for us to be inclusive, right? So I've been on a few different panels, let's say, or I've seen panels where we're thanking the allies. I don't know if we need to necessarily thank them. Yes, I'm glad they're there, but it's those kinds of little nuances where I feel like with the right talking points and maybe partnership with DIB, I think we can land the messaging a little bit better.
Yep,
Yep.
I agree completely with that. I just did a whole session on that within the ERG engagement tour. Like, allies should not be the focus of your ERG, which was actually a shock
Uh,
to some people on the
yep.
call or at the session. So, agreed with that. What about ERG budget spends?
Yes, let's talk about the budget spends, right? It always seems no matter what the budget is, it's always like never enough. So I think it's and this is where taking some time to invest, to have partners like you to really talk about what are some best practices? How might we think about engaging in different ways our ERGs and what that spend might really look like? I've seen some really low budget, really high impact things happen, and then certainly if we have the dollars, like bringing in those like marquee speakers and things like that are really impactful. However, I'm really like on this career focused piece for our ERGs, and it's not career from the lens of let's go to your company's I don't know learning or talent development team and just replicate. Like that's not where my mind is at. It's more around can we have a conversation around careers through the lens of a community to talk about what's real, what's working, what's it like navigating career at this organization? So, talk to me about how are you telling your story? Talk to me about your brand. Do you even know what it is? Talk to me about your career development plans. Do you have them? Are you clear? Are you confident? Are you talking to me, ERG leaders? How are you telling your story to your managers? I really think there's an opportunity, a space in this ERG space to really talk about and celebrate careers. I love the idea that our ERG leaders are gaining these incredible skills that they can absolutely apply and should be applying back on the job. Give them their receipts, right? Give them the additional ratings because it can be considered a stretch, right? I don't know, you had me go off.
No, I love it. What about some not so great versions of ERG budget spends?
Oh, yes, the budget spends. I think it's the ones that aren't strategic, meaning it can be easy to throw a happy hour, not to say there's not a good spot to bring folks together. It can be an easy thing to do a lunch, but in this, like, virtual hybrid environment, obviously, some aren't able to participate, so then you have that piece of it. I think it's just the intention and the strategy behind it that is for me, right? So if we're really talking about engaging in, all of our new folks that are coming along, maybe you do that, and then you have a KPI that you're trying to get after, and then you can tell a more cohesive story. But the spin for spin's sake, and we aren't really tying it back to any of our goals, then it's just lost on me, and then that's where I feel like some ERGs get the reputation of being like the fun club, or that's cute to just come together, which culture and community is so critical, and there's a way that we can do it that I think can bring impact.
Unmuted. Okay, there we go. And with that impact oftentimes being around truly driving belonging, I'm curious if you could give us one in person and one virtual version of programming that can act that you've actually seen be impactful in driving belonging. I know you gave us some already, but if you had to think of some, and it doesn't have to be from a Black ERG, just in general that you've seen that really resonated.
Yeah, I've seen a few. I think I really like the cross ERG collaboration ones, right? There's something special around the intersectionality. So I'm thinking of a moment where it was a intersectional moment with like our pride ERG as well as some of our others where we're really able to center voices that really are intersectional, right? So I think those moments are really impactful. So this one in particular was in person. It was in our main area where we have on one of our lawns at Nike where we have like a lot of different big events. And so it was all types of engagement. We had a Black book fair that people can go and pick up their a favorite Black book. We had vendors that really represented our LG plus community, right? Certain pastries and things like that. So it was just like a mix of different identities. We had a walk the runway fashion show with intersectional folks. So anyway, it's just where we were able to really celebrate and come together a number of different communities and perspectives. That was just really a beautiful moment. In terms of to your point around creating that sense of belonging, I think I've also seen those virtual meetings where we're centering the voices of the community. I think API community, I remember one where we talked about the history, right? And we talked about Stop Asian Hate and that sense of belonging and being able to name it and talk about from their vantage point, the microaggressions and things like that around accent and just those different perspectives. And what that did was to really allow for that community to really feel seen and heard and really cultivate that sense of belonging. So I've seen some really show places where that has really matriculated. I think where I think there's opportunities is when sometimes ERGs may have a community meeting or a meeting and they may have a run of show and a presentation, which is fine if the intention is to, like, get out information or that kind of thing. But I'm always curious about that member that is that's just the first meeting that they're attending. Do they leave that meeting feeling like they belong? Do they leave that meeting with a friend? And so I'm a big fan of breakouts where you can at least meet someone. I'm a big fan of at my company, we have something called Get to Know Yous, where from our CEO on down, if you see that come through, you're accepting it and it's a free space to truly do what it sounds like, get to know the other person. And so those things where that can facilitate that connection, I think I see those as being really impactful as well.
Yeah, honestly, and that's another thing that I've realized that's happening a lot in the ERG space where there's been a lot of events where they're just around like updates for the ERG and nothing engaging to people at all, just something
Yeah.
where you're just sitting there listening. So
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense to me in terms of things that actually help drive being belonging is getting people involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know we're over time here, but with this being the ERG movement podcast, one question that I really like to ask everyone is what is one thing that you would pinpoint in the ERG space that needs change or that could benefit from some change? Really, what the ERG movement is about doing things differently and better, essentially. So, is there any almost a trend that you see that you would say, this is something I would love to tell the ERG space?
Yeah. I think at some of these organizations, there isn't that representation at the senior leadership levels. And so I think that there's an opportunity to have each ERG think through what is the one, two, three things that they would like that senior leadership thing to know, do, or respond to, or be aware of, or what opportunity do they really see? I think that's probably an opportunity is we know, we see it, right? But how do we get that information? How do we get that narrative to the people that can really impact that change, right? And one idea could be the end of each Heritage Month, that particular ERG gets 30 minutes, gets an hour with the CEO to tell their story and provide that compelling ask, right? And that ask has to be real sharp. Now, this is not something cute that you might maybe get an answer from your DEI team or from HR, but is there one kind of piece of movement that we really believe we would want that CEO to take action on? And then we drive to that accountability. And I mentioned that, I'll give you an example back to Nike, and I mentioned all these folks, all different backgrounds, right? Coming into the berm, coming into Beaverton. And you can say, work was great. They're connected with the ERGs. That's real cute, all the things. But the struggle was living in that community in Beaverton, right? The It's homogenous, not a lot of diversity. Where are you sending your kids to school? What's that relocation? If you're on a relocation, like just some of the issues related to just living in that particular community. And that a few years ago, that was something that we took to the CEO to say, we need to wield some power as it relates to our relocation packages, right? So to consider some other neighborhoods, right? We might want to consider figuring out how do we influence our schools based on like our education or just some of the civic things. Like it's not technically an employee internally facing opportunity, but it's an opportunity that's impacting our employees.
I
Right.
love that. And no one has ever mentioned that tip before. So I love it even more in terms of we want the company to do something for our company, but we have to articulate what that is and make it very easy for them to understand. And that's why even you saying the easy one, 2, 3, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. Okay. Let the people know how can they connect with you in case they want to learn more or even just to be connected in general.
Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm there. You can find me probably through Mosaic Butterfly, my consulting firm, and I can send you the information. You can get it out to the people.
Please do. Thank you all for watching, and thank you so much, MJ, for joining us. Like I mentioned, we have some amazing people, and this was definitely no different. Looking forward to seeing you all on the next one.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thanks for joining.